Hi, thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. We live in a narcissistic society where everyone thinks about themselves. And we see this in social media. Social media is all about me. Look where I am. Look what I'm doing. Look what I had for breakfast. As Christians, we should think differently. Philippians 2 tells us we're supposed to consider others more important than ourselves. That's the exact opposite of what social media is designed to do. Exodus 32 contains perhaps one of the most radical examples of putting others ahead of yourself. The Israelites sinned. They worshipped a golden calf. That was a very grave sin. Moses went to God and asked him to forgive the Israelites. Moses also said if God was not willing to forgive the Israelites, then he wanted to be blotted out of God's book. That's a very radical example of putting others ahead of yourself, to be willing to be blotted out of God's book. Now let's take a closer look at this. Let's start in Philippians 2, verse 3. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. And so there's a very clear statement here to consider others more important than ourselves. And again, that's the exact opposite of what social media is designed to do and what social media tries to make us do. Now let's take a look at Exodus 32. There's an example of this. Moses had been up on Mount Sinai. While he was there, the Israelites got impatient. They created the golden calf and they started to worship it. Moses came down from the mountain. He destroyed the calf, confronted Aaron, and then we read this. Verse 30. On the next day, Moses said to the people, You yourselves have committed a great sin. And now I am going up to Yahweh. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Then Moses returned to Yahweh and said, Alas! This people has committed a great sin, and they have made a god of gold for themselves. But now, if you will, forgive their sin, and if not, please blot me out from your book which you have written. So, Moses went to God and he said, If you are willing, then please forgive their sin, the sin of worshiping the golden calf. But then notice what Moses said next. If you're not willing, again, this is Moses talking to God, if you're not willing to forgive the Israelites, then please blot me out from your book. And that's a very radical example of putting others ahead of yourself. Moses was asking him to be blotted out of his book if God was not willing to forgive the Israelites. Verse 33, Yahweh said to Moses, Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. But go now, lead the people where I told you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I will punish them for their sin. Then Yahweh smote the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron had made. So we see that God's response was no. He was not going to blot Moses out of his book. Instead, God was going to blot out those who had actually sinned against him. Notice the word punish. God said he was going to punish them. And then notice the word smote. God did indeed punish the Israelites. He smote the people because of what they had did with the golden calf, the fact that they had worshipped this idol. Now, as I said, we live in a narcissistic society where everything's about me, and social media encourages this. Social media is all about, look what I did, look where I am, look what I had for breakfast. As Christians, we should think differently. Philippians 2 tells us to consider others more important than ourselves. And we have a great example of that in Exodus 32, perhaps one of the most radical examples of that. The Israelites had sinned. Moses went to God and asked God to forgive the Israelites. And furthermore, Moses asked God to blot him out of his book if God was not willing to forgive the Israelites. And that's a very great example of putting others ahead of yourself, the fact that you were willing to be blotted out of God's book if he was not willing to forgive others. If you believe in what I'm doing here at Bible Mountain, please join my Patreon page. Patreon is a membership site that makes it easy for creators to have the resources they need to keep creating. In order to sign up, go to BibleMountain.com, click on Patreon, and that'll take you to the sign up page. Once again, thank you for watching BibleMountain.com.